coming. We have a really special event we've been working on for quite a while now. And I think you're going to find these stories really interesting and very applicable to today and what is happening in our society today. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Stephanie D'Auria. Dr. Stephanie D'Auria earned her doctorate from University of California, Riverside. Her expertise is in criminology and gender, which guides her research on prison education and reentry experiences. She completed the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program Training Institute, which certified her to teach college classes in jail and in prison. She's the first professor in Southern California to offer an Inside Out prisoner education course in a local jail. So we're very happy to have Dr. Stephanie D'Auria here to moderate. We are lucky enough that she teaches at Vanguard, and she also teaches here at Saddleback. So we're really lucky to have her. So I'm going to give that over to Stephanie now.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. You know, I found out about this event when Professor Camelot was sort of brainstorming her idea, and I started to learn about our two speakers' experience. And I found out about it at just the right time, because I learned about it in August, and that is busy season for professors, which I am one. I'm looking over all of the research. I want to refresh, my classes, my discussions. It can't just be the same old boring stuff. And unfortunately, it was all bad news, right? I was looking for a little silver lining so I could cap some of my lectures with, but wait, there is another pathway forward. And sadly, especially in a couple of ways, that wasn't the case. And so those two areas, one of them, I was looking at interpersonal conflict for one of my discussion lectures. And how many of you think you know what the research is going to suggest about this area? You think we might be, what do you think?
About interpersonal conflict?
Yeah, how are we trending, do you suppose? I think we're increasing, decreasing, increasing. All right, anybody want to go with that vote? Ding, 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 you are the winner here, right? Unfortunately. So in the United States, even as compared to other democratized countries, we are experiencing trends in increasing conflict, not just physical sorts of conflict, but certainly emotional and interpersonal conflicts as well, often predicted by social divisions, right? And so that's really discouraging. And then I looked at some of the research for another lecture on well-being. Also, bad news. Like, I was ready to run to get my Ben & Jerry's because I needed to learn this with a side of ice cream. Anybody have that kind of experience too? I mean, that's how I was feeling at the moment. I stumbled across the 2023 Surgeon General's report on loneliness. Have any of you reviewed it? It's important to know about, but it's not going to be uplifting information. There are some profound mental and physical consequences associated with our epidemic of loneliness in the United States. We are feeling our loneliness in our bodies with increases in disease and premature death. This is serious stuff, right? But again, we don't just want to end it with that, because I felt very discouraged, like, well, might as well give up. I've got nothing to leave my 7-year-old son. But bad news, right? Instead, I was feeling pretty hopeful after hearing Professor Camelot's idea for this event, because we have two men who have encountered themselves in a space like this, in a college environment. And because of their backgrounds initially, there were some perceptions that could have interfered with collaboration, the kind of collaboration we see today. And instead of an inability to sort of work across perceived differences, they came to that space with, over time, open minds about the other. And so we want to hear a little bit more about that experience for them and feel equipped toward the end with some ideas about what we can do in our own communities to address some of these greater social problems that I just shared with you. So let me formally introduce our speakers today. We have with us today Dr. J.C. Cavett. He is the Executive Director for Project Rebound. That's right. At Cal State Fullerton, one of my alma maters. As the Executive Director of Project Rebound, J.C. Cavett leads transformative programs that support formerly and currently incarcerated individuals in pursuing higher education. A committed advocate for second chances, J.C. brings more than a decade of experience on reentry, student support, trauma-informed care, and systems leadership. J.C.'s journey from incarceration to executive leadership is a testament to the power of education and perseverance. After surviving 22 years of incarceration, he was released in 2017 and has since earned a bachelor's degree in sociology with honors, a master's of social work, and he's completed a doctorate in marriage and family therapy. Thank you so much for being here, J.C. Thank you. Also with us today, we have Professor Darren Lee. Darren Lee is a seasoned professional with 30 years of experience as a municipal law enforcement officer in Los Angeles and Orange counties. Before retiring in 2024 as a lieutenant, he served as the West Anaheim commander and led the peer support team where he and his K-9 partner, Charlie, developed a therapy dog unit to support officer wellness. For 21 years, Darren concurrently served as a lecturer at California State University Fullerton, teaching in the sociology and criminal justice departments. His dual roles allowed him to bridge the gap between academia and the real-world challenges of law enforcement, offering students unique insights grounded in both theory and practice. Thank you for being here, Professor Lee. And now, like you, I'm going to be taking notes, trying to learn a little something from these two, so please join me in giving your attention to our speakers today.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. Appreciate it.
I don't know if I could keep up with you.
No, I think you should definitely kick us off, because it started with you.
All right, here we go. Get ready for the sparks to fly. And I say that in a real genuine, humane way, the sparks flying, because that is the relationship that I most enjoy about talking to JC. But it didn't start it didn't start in a conventional way. So I kind of want to paint this picture of this police officer that decided to become a college professor. So I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley in the 70s and the 80s, and I was a consumer of like all the media. I used to love to watch different television shows. I watched the news, and I was raised during the time of the tough on crime era, during that time. So going through elementary school and high school, I led a pretty traditional life in a nuclear family with my mom and dad and my brother, and then went on to college. I got my degree in criminal justice from Cal State LA, and just about that time I decided I wanted to be a police officer. And so 1987, 88, I start college, and I'm taking classes with different leaders in the sheriff's department, because if you know where Cal State LA is, it's on the border of, it's in East LA and very close to the LA Sheriff's Department headquarters. So we had a lot of retired and in-service police, law enforcement deputies coming and teaching the courses. So I was being indoctrinated into this world of criminal justice and catching bad guys and putting people in jail, because that's what good police officers do. About that same time, one of my favorite TV shows came out in 1989. Anybody want to guess what that was? 1989, favorite police officer TV. Cops. And Cops, the images that I watched on Cops were images of police officers chasing the bad guys, putting them in jail, because we're not going to tolerate crime. And so I was consuming that, and it was getting me really, really excited to be a police officer, because I wanted to do that. And so shortly thereafter, I became a police officer in the San Gabriel Valley in 1994. I went to the police academy, did a few years in the San Gabriel Valley at a police department, and then in the year 2000, I ended up getting hired as a police officer with the city of Anaheim as a police officer. But about that same time as I transitioned over to Anaheim, it was the late 90s, early 2000s, I got my master's degree in sociology, is where I met Dr. Camelot. And I began teaching at Cal State Fullerton in the Department of Sociology, because that's what our degrees were in. And the first couple of years, I was teaching courses, and I really wasn't finding great purpose and passion in the lessons I was teaching. And the reason was, I was standing in front of the classroom lecturing. And I would stand up the first week of class and I would tell everybody I'm a police officer and I'm going to teach your class. And I would look across the room and people would go, oh, wow, that's really cool. A police officer is going to stand up here and tell some great stories. Well, that worked for a couple of years until it didn't work. And I remember telling my wife, Lisa, who's sitting in the front row, she's a lifelong educator for a local school district. And I go, my lessons are not that good. It's really boring coming to class. And she goes, Darren, you got to quit talking. You got to quit talking and start listening. And one of the things you should do is come up with 3 or 4 what she calls essential questions for the classroom. Introduce those into the classroom environment, create a discussion, and let the students learn from each other rather than you standing up there force-feeding the information. So I took that advice, and it worked. I enjoyed teaching more. Discussions were stimulating. And then about 2018, I'd probably been doing that job for a good, 10 years, 15 years, and it was working. And then one afternoon, it was the first day of week 1 at Cal State Fullerton. I think, what was the class? Law and Society? Criminology. Yeah. In comes the classroom, and I promise you, I have to set this up for you guys, because at the time, I'm a tough police officer. I was proud of myself that I was able to put a lot of people in jail, survive the streets, fight the good fight, and do the right thing. And I was proud of that. So I come into the classroom on week 1 and I introduced myself. Hey, everybody, my name's Darren Lee. I got my degree from here and here, and I'm a police officer. And I saw the room go, oh, police officer. And this one student in the front of my classroom, and I remember, it was one of my very few African-American students, because at Cal State LA, there's not a huge African-American population, let alone male African-American student population. And he raises his hand, he goes, just to get this clear, you're a practicing police officer here to teach this class. I go, yeah, I am. And then I remember JC going, phew. And I said to myself, this is going to be a tough semester. And so we engaged each other. We had class, week 1, week 2, using my wife's suggestions to create these great discussions. And I remember probably in around week 2, I remember JC, I knew him as James at the time. He got up to leave class along with his neighbor sitting next to him. And I still remember his name. He was a Hispanic guy named Julio, because Julio was a tough nut to crack too. And they were shooting at me. They were like challenging me, and I loved it. And so I remember both of them getting up, and I remember JC said something to Julio to the effect of either, I like this class, or this is going to be a good semester. And I took that and I put that in the back of my head. We go through the semester, we engage in some heated debates about police officers and race relations and the different things that police officers do in the criminal justice system and how minorities are treated in the system. And we engage in this really wonderful academic, professional, enlightening conversation about this topic.
Can I pause? I want to pause you right there. That's his interpretation.
Oh, yeah, you see it differently.
My interpretation of the first day in that first week of the semester looks a little bit different.
Tell us.
And so, unlike Darren, I did not grow up in a nuclear traditional family. I'm originally from Oakland, California, San Francisco Bay Area, and grew up in a lot of poverty. Both my parents were drug addicts, alcoholics. My mother's solution then was to give her kids away to DCSF. So I grew up in foster care. I was homeless at one point in my life before age 17 when I committed my crime. In spite of all of the turmoil that I was navigating with as a child, there was no stability for me growing up. So chaos, fear, doubt, uncertainty, that was my reality that I had to embrace every single day. And so let me fast forward a little bit. School, in spite of everything that was going on around me growing up, school was always my safe place. I was always a bright student in spite of the hell that I had to navigate in my household and in my community. Me and Darren are close to the same age. And during the 80s, for him in this tough on crime where he looked at it almost, not your words, but glamorizing what was shown and depicted, for me and where I came from, the war on crime meant war on black people. My interactions with police officers wasn't something that was cheered and I encouraged. Every time that I saw a police officer in my neighborhood, it was them ripping some man away from his wife and his kids. When I saw police officers in my neighborhood, it was them slamming someone on the ground face first, breaking their nose or busting their teeth out, going through their pockets, taking their money, taking their drugs, smashing the drugs on the ground, but confiscating the money. Police officers was something to be feared in my neighborhood. I didn't view them as a help, a place of safety to go run to when I had a problem or an issue. They were the enemy. This cop show that he speaks about, when I watch that, every time you see black and brown folks on this show. And if folks were only to watch this television show, you would think that only black and brown individuals committed crime in this country. And when we look at the historical statistical facts, it is not true. But yet that narrative that is publicized is always the black and brown face. When we start talking about those who utilize welfare services and assistance, you hear these terms like welfare queen, which always had this black woman's face, even though statistically, white women use welfare services more than any ethnicity. But yet, it was always a person of color. And so for me growing up, the whole thing with law enforcement was a fear-based. They're not my friends. They're not. And it's ironic because a week prior to me committing my crime, I was 17 years old, I'm a straight A student, always had aspirations of going on to college and medical school. I wanted to be a doctor, a pediatrician. I was sitting in my kitchen, and it was me, my dad had gotten me and my sisters back from DCSF foster care at this point. And I was sitting in the kitchen windowsill, my dad was cooking eggs, and I made this statement: I am the only one in this family that has not been arrested. Why did I say that? A week later, I was sitting in the backseat of a cop car, looking at the rest of my life in prison. Never had a criminal conviction before, never been in juvenile hall before, but now I am looking at the rest of my life at 17 being snatched from me. It was the first time that I ever heard this term, super predator. And for those of you that are a little older or sociology majors in the room, this super predator term was really used and criminalized by law enforcement. And I remember sitting in juvenile hall saying, how am I a super predator when I've never been arrested a day in my life? I'm a straight A student, basketball team, football team. I gave back to the generation that was under me, but yet I am being labeled this term super predator. It was in juvenile hall that I really started to come to terms with who I am, all of this chaos that was going on around me, because up until that point, I was able to hide behind things like drinking, smoking weed, had a bunch of girls around me because I was the athlete, I was the smart kid. And those are all things that I was using to hide my insecurities, my fear, my guilt, my shame, the stuff that I didn't want the outward world to see that was going on with me. I did a pretty good job until I was in that cell. In that cell with no distractions, and it was just me and my thoughts. I realized like, yo, I don't like me. All of these labels that people were putting on me, I was doing my best to live up to these labels. And again, call it in sociology, when this labeling theory, people will either live up or down to the labels that are placed on them. until we give them the skills and the know-how of how to remove those labels off. And so when I was in juvenile hall, I went back to the thing that I knew best. That was education, that was the classroom. I thrived in that environment. And for the next 22 years inside of the system, growing up as a young black man, having no clue what it really meant to be a man, and now I'm thrust in this world surrounded by all of these other men. And I had to navigate and figure out who did I want to be as a person. Very, very difficult. Here it is that I am young enough to be tried as an adult, to be given a 25 to life sentence, but when I got to the level 4 prison that I was housed at, they had my ID card, and y'all will see a picture of my ID. They had the ID card in the window of the commissary, and it said, "Do not sell tobacco to this inmate." Old enough to get a life sentence, but I couldn't buy cigarettes. Think about that for a second. And I wasn't the only minor. It was my image with 2 other young people that came with me on that bus from the county jail. And out of the 3 of us, 1 of us made it out, and you're looking at him. I realized early on that time, the carceral system, can be used as a weapon. And so for me, the first day of class, I was fresh out, y'all, after serving 22 years. And I got all of these imposter syndrome things going on, like, yo, the education that I got inside, is it equivalent to that of a university setting on the outside? And I'm doubting myself, even though I came with 2 AA degrees. I came with a 3.83 GPA. And now I get to Darren's class. And I remember the first day, and he's going over the syllabus, like most professors do that first day. And I got it, and he's talking about a couple of assignments. One of the assignments that was on this man's syllabus was we had to ride in the back seat of a cop car for 4 hours and do a paper about the experience.
Wait a second. It was you had to ride in the police car, not the back seat.
I ain't never seen a black man in the front seat.
Okay. Interesting, right? Interesting perception. Very different than mine.
And so instantly, so when he said what he did, like he's an active, like officer, a sergeant, I'm like, damn, he's teaching the class. He doesn't know that I'm fresh out. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't know how this is gonna turn out right now, because I anticipated, based off of my lived experience, that he and I would butt heads at some point. But now I'm wrestling with this assignment that there's no chance in hell that I'm willingly putting myself in the cop car in Orange County. It's just not gonna happen. So yo, professor, I have an issue, and I was the only black face in the room. I have an issue with putting myself in a cop car willingly to ride around for 4 hours. I can't do that. I am not willing to do that. The alternative assignment that he came up, I don't know if you had it already tucked away or if you pulled it up, right then and there. The alternative, go to a criminal courthouse and sit in a criminal proceeding for 4 hours and write about the power dynamics that you see at play. Took the lesser of 2 evils, even though me sitting inside of a criminal courthouse watching the power dynamics, again, being only the only person of color, still traumatizing. But my grade means a lot to me, right? And so I did the lesser of 2 evils. Then every week, Darren would come into class and he would literally start the class by talking about an arrest or a bust that he made, him or his team. And I started to think that, oh, this dude is trying to recruit the class. And he would talk about job opportunities that, for the academy and all of this stuff. And I saw it as like, yeah, he's trying to wheel some of these folks in. But it was right around class 3. And he came in and he described this arrest that him and his team made. I believe it was on a Saturday. And he said, as soon as we had these handcuffs, as soon as we had the cuffs on him, we owned his ass. And I lost it. I lost it, y'all. I knew it was gonna be a challenge for me to sit in this space and talk about criminality, law and order, police conduct. But when he said that, I remember saying, listen, I don't care what this individual did, but it doesn't give you the right to say that you own anyone. There's 28, 30 of us in this space. Chances are that there is someone either here in this room that has experience with the carceral system or has a family member, loved one, or a friend that does. And so we hear you come into this room week after week and talk about the bad guys, the criminals, this othering language. That is offensive potentially to someone that is in this space, Professor. And he's set with that. And now I'm like, oh shit, Jason, what did you do? I'm not gonna get an A in this room, this class. And he did something I didn't expect. He apologized. I did not see that coming. And that started, I think, for this semester in this class, to where we knew that Darren was a professor that people can really come into this space and speak their truth. Mind you, at the time, he still doesn't know that I'm formally incarcerated and served 22 years. But yet this conversation has now, it opened up a door to where there was a shift in the energy in our space. So I want to pause there.
I used terminology at the time. And I want you all to know that I said it without malice. It was matter of fact. That was just the way I spoke as a police officer. At the time, I think it probably had 24 years on as a police officer, working as a sergeant at the time. And that's just the way we spoke. Using the words bad guys, or you own that guy, or using other terminology that would be derogatory to most lay persons is common language in that world of policing. And there's a variety of different explanations as to why we use and maybe have a different sense of humor, a different sense of what's going on than the average person. But I said it with no ill intent. I didn't know. And it wasn't until JC challenged me on that I had to sit with that and sit in the car and go home and go, I had no idea where those terms came from. I didn't know owning somebody had anything to do with slavery. Didn't know. I didn't know when I used the term bad guys that, you know what? Maybe not every person that is arrested is a bad guy. That was my lived experience is being indoctrinated into the world of law enforcement. That is what we were fed in the police academies and in the field training programs, and then with the cohort I would associate with at work. But it was the most stimulating semester I have ever had to this day. Because of JC and Julio, your partner that sat next to you, it is because of JC that I live to teach, that I go into classrooms, because I don't want to force feed or indoctrinate anybody in my classrooms to become just like me. I don't want to create robots. I want to create critical thinkers that are able to exist in an environment maybe full of conflict, but harness that conflict, harness that dissent, and turn it into a learning opportunity, a teachable moment to where we can actually do something good with that, do something good with the crap.
It was interesting because as the semester went on, and I feel like Darren knew that me and Julio, he would make a point, and then he would kind of glance over, and we sat in the front, and he would kind of glance over to see what the reaction or response was going to be, and it wasn't us challenging him, right, or his authority, him as a professor, but we knew that there was another side to what Darren was saying. And for me in particular, because Julio didn't have experience with the carceral system, he had been pulled over by law enforcement but never been arrested. I knew the other side of what happens after you get the handcuffs on, in the booking, in the arraignment, in the court process, in the actual confinement. and how individuals are treated in these spaces. Again, mind you, he doesn't know this about me, that I'm bringing all of this stuff into his space. And at the same time, I gotta say that I was afraid. I was afraid to open up to him and say what I was bringing into his classroom because of the way he referred to people. The same way that I saw the war on drugs as war on black people when he was using the language that he was using at the beginning of the semester, I took it personal, like, I am a bad student, because this is his interpretation of those who he arrests, those who are in our criminal justice system. And I didn't set out to change Darren's mind. I wrestled with this class for so long because I was getting triggered and activated every single week. And I did not want my grade to be impacted by it. I didn't want his perception of me to change if he knew that I had just came home after a 22-year sentence. And so I'm trying to filter myself of how much of my true voice and experience I can bring into his space, and at the same time trying to navigate. I didn't want my peers to then start looking at me differently either and be like, yo, this dude just got out the pen? I still gotta be a student on this campus, you know? And as at the time, Cal State Fullerton had less than a 2% African-American student population. There's just not a lot of black students at our campus. And so the last thing I want is to be walking in a space where my friends or colleagues, they fear me because of my criminal conviction or experience. And so I'm holding on to all of this as I'm navigating the semester. But it did get better. The semester got better because the conversations that were being had, it felt like to me, everybody in the room, the fakeness that, as a teacher myself, that students can kind of come in the classroom space and just kind of go through the motions, something shifted in this room to where when we came in and we got into these small group discussions and debates, folks' true feelings about law enforcement, about laws, about disparity gaps, people were coming in and talking about real stuff. And so it made the learning experience, I think, for me, probably for Professor Darren and everybody else in that classroom, to where this was one of the classes I actually looked forward to going to, because I knew it was going to be an intellectual challenge with him. He was going to hold firm to his training, his indoctrination, the law. There was one conversation that you brought in, there was one particular law, and I don't know the exact name, but it's the reasonable, would another officer who was in that situation respond in the same way that you did? What was the?
Yeah, so Graham versus Connor, if some of you know, the piece of case law authorizes through statute, it determines what is reasonable when a police officer uses force, which includes hitting someone with a baton or a taser, or even using deadly force. That is the prevailing case law. It still is, and at that time.
And so there was a huge discussion around this law. And it was interesting because if you had been indoctrinated kind of in the law enforcement world, what's reasonable to law enforcement officers, to the layperson, is excessive. And so I remember this conversation about excessive use of force. And it felt like then, to me, the majority of the classroom did not agree with this law that was currently on the books. But yet Darren defended it adamantly. And so I believe at the time there was a case that was just happening, it was publicized. And when you see excessive force as a law enforcement officer, can you even say that that is excessive? Versus standing behind the law and using the law as a shield to avoid accountability.
But hold on, here we go. I had to live it. Like, I had to live somebody pulling a knife on me, pointing a gun at me, trying to throw me into traffic to get hit by a car. I had to live that, right? So the leveraging of Graham versus Connor in my ability to choose a tool to defend myself or defend the public, I appreciated it because it kept me alive. It allowed me to go home without ending up in the emergency room, where I have ended up more than once. But it allowed me to finish my career So I'm standing here today. So I still, even though we disagree, I still support the prevailing case law of Graham versus Connor because it allows police officers to make decisions and then ultimately go home to their loved ones at the end of their shift.
I don't get that.
But it's okay for us to disagree.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And as a citizen, like, I want law enforcement to be safe too when they go out and do their job. I recognize at the end of the day, it's a job, and it's a tough one at that.
Yeah.
And so to be, first responders sometimes running into situations where you're going in blind and you don't know what's on the other side of that door or what's in that car that you're thinking a routine traffic stop. So I totally get that, and there are numerous cases that have been documented to where the excessive force went overboard.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And it's
agree on
like,
that.
how do we then have a conversation about this particular law that's on the books, but also at the same time, where's the conversation and accountability of when these officers do go way too far? And that was the conversation that I think even today now is what broader societies and communities are waiting to have that conversation. How do we hold law enforcement accountable when, yeah, you way overdid what you were supposed to do?
But I think the takeaway from that experience in the classroom is that, and I tell students, you may not agree with everything that we are learning. You may not agree with every law or policy on the books, but my job as a professor is to bring these topics into the classroom so we can deconstruct them. And so you, as aspiring judges or prosecutors or defense attorneys or government officials, it is your job then to take what you've learned here in this environment where there was critical thinking actually happening, take that energy and go make changes if you think something is broken. But don't just come to class to show up and take notes and not dip your feet into these controversial topics, because nobody is going to benefit from that other than you getting your grade. But if you're looking to change the world, that's how you change the world. It's got to hurt. It's got to sting here a little bit if you want to make change. But if it's all roses and lemonade and thoughts and being comfortable, if it doesn't sting, there's not going to be a change. And that's what I wanted to create in the classroom.
And you did a great job.
And you did a great job, like, challenging me in some of the things that I saw, because up until then, all the students did was like, I ain't saying nothing. I need to get my grade, I'm going to do the assignment, and let's move on. And so I can honestly say, folks, that semester actually changed me as a person, as an educator, and as a police officer. I did my job differently, and we can go into that area later on, but you might have thought if it had been any other student or any other police officer, professor in the room, we might have been at each other's throats the whole semester and hated each other, and we would have been glad to end the semester. But that wasn't the end, though. There was more to it.
The pandemic had happened. George Floyd murder just occurred, and I get this email. Now,
well, this is, okay, 2018, this is 2 or 3 years later,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've since graduated. I hadn't seen Darren since the semester. And I get an email saying, hey, I don't know if you remember me, Darren Lee, I taught the criminology class, and I don't know if you're still at Fullerton or not, but would love to get together, have coffee, talk to you about a project if you're open. And I respond, I remember this. And we hopped on a call, and Darren told me about how that class changed him as a man, as a law enforcement officer. He shared with me, and he was in a position to teach and train other law officers, policemen, and how that experience stuck with him way after the semester was over. And at the same time, that experience stuck with me way after the semester was over. I had no idea the way that landed for him. But this was something that I was still talking about at the conferences that I attend and classroom presentations that I present, because it was real for me to sit with someone, and I never met a law enforcement officer that, one, would admit when they were wrong, but two, publicly apologize, right? And for me, that said, man, he's not a bad dude, right? Now, maybe he didn't know that these things were offensive, but once he realized it, he pivoted and corrected. And then Darren started talking about a project that him and the PD force was doing, and looking for some community members to participate in this pilot thing. And that was a whole nother, I wasn't feeling that. Do you remember this?
Absolutely.
And it was a simulator thing that
we were looking for some folks from the community to participate in this use of force simulator, and then to form. What is everyone laughing for? It was a great project. We were introducing people, the media, into this and say, hey, well, what's your perception of using force now? And so I wanted to bring him in because I thought, what a great, wonderful idea is to get a black man's insight into this concept of using force. And I thought he would be all on board, but that was the furthest thing from the truth. And it was an emphatic no. You told me no. The takeaway that I had from that was not just the no, that was fine, but we probably spoke for an hour.
Yeah.
And I remember we talked about all these different things like we were in class again, and I was getting heated and sparks were flying, and I remember getting off the phone, and I was like, yeah. I loved it. That's awesome. And I don't know what his reaction was, but it brought back that productive, conflict-filled, dissenting environment again, and I really love that because it makes us all better people when we can coexist in that world. So, and that was it. And then ever since that point, I think basically we would touch bases every now and then to get together for coffee or a phone call or a text message or whatnot. And what we have found is over the course of the last few years is that we have a lot in common. These two guys are not supposed to be in the same room together. Cops and parole, and pardon me, I use the term parolee, but cops and parolees aren't supposed to hang out together. It just isn't supposed to happen. Yet here we are I'm sitting in his executive office with a big window, and we're talking about how both of our kids were in drumline together, and we're married, and what high school is like for our kids. And so it was a really, to start off with, what started off as what I believed or I thought was going to be a very contentious semester ended up really blossoming into this wonderful professional and personal relationship with a good person that continues to teach me as a retired police officer today.
I actually asked Darren for advice, relationship advice, professional, like navigating higher ed. He's been in it way longer than I have. And now with all of the challenges and the bureaucracy and the red tape, it's like, what should I do? Like having someone to go to, in spite of our histories, like he has this vast wealth of knowledge, and I recognize that. And so again, learning that he and I have a lot in common, it's like, okay, you was a cop and I was a criminal at one point, but that's behind us now. What are we doing moving forward? I think it was that first call too, Darren, that I actually opened up to you and shared about.
Oh yeah. So he I forgot about that part. So he tells me this. He goes, yeah, I didn't tell you, but I was out of prison and I was on parole and I just didn't want to say anything. Okay. Out of respect, I didn't ask him what his commitment offense was. I didn't ask him where he gated out from. I didn't ask him any of these things because I was trying to be respectful like you taught me, sir. And then what does any good investigator do after you get off the phone with some good information? Got my laptop and I Googled this man's name. Oh my gosh. Unbelievable. To me, unbelievable. This guy was in my classroom, and so just learning about some of the things that he had been involved with, the court hearings, the trial, the incarceration, just learning about JC, really it took me back. I'm like, ooh, wow. I can't believe, number one, he was in my classroom, but number two, how far we've come. Mm-hmm. This is something. This is not, it's not right. I mean, it's not conventional, but there's something here. There is an opportunity for us to not just learn from each other, but share what we're learning from each other with the rest of the world. And that's why I think we're actually here today. And so at one point I reached out to Dr. Camelot, and I talked to her about JC, and she reacted in the way I thought she was going to react. Oh my gosh, there's so many great learning opportunities. And then here we are. Yes, that's how I saw it. But everybody's perception is different, right? But I'm glad it worked out that way.
As am I. Mm-hmm. As am I. The fact that you can get people together that some would say are on the opposite end of the spectrum, but are willing to come to the table and to have a dialogue. I think in this country right now, and that's what's missing. We got folks that are so entrenched in their position that they're not even willing to come to the table and to have a meaningful conversation about your position, where you stand, and why you feel the way that you do. And I think Darren and I, without even realizing it or knowing it, that's what we did. We were willing and open to come to the table, have dialogue, respectful dialogue, I was able to see from his position, right? And I get, he has a family, he has a wife and kids to go home to, and he wants to be safe, and like, those are the same things I want at the end of the day. And when it comes to the things that we differ on, it's like, I get why he feels the way he does, and hopefully he sees the same for me as a black man living in this country that historically have been pushed out, marginalized, disenfranchised, where my experience when it comes to law enforcement is very different. I remember too, Darren, in class, you had asked something about, no, it wasn't you, it was a student. It was a student that brought up, it was a female student being escorted to her car at night. And the majority of the classroom said that they felt safe. I don't. If I see a law enforcement officer when I'm leaving campus and it's night and I'm walking to my car, instantly I'm like, gosh, it is not a good feeling for me to be like, oh, there's a cop here, so I know I'm gonna make it to my car. I have the opposite feeling, right? And it's weird, but based off of my experience, it's I'm gonna say abnormal to this day. And I'm a law-producing, abiding citizen, pay my taxes, been home for 9 years, and a cop car gets behind me. I still, as a black man, like, I have to do all of the things that I was told to do by my parents. I just had to have a conversation with my 17-year-old, now he just turned 18-year-old son, who got his license, and I had to have this conversation with my son about what to do if you get pulled over by law enforcement, right? And when I'm talking to some of my friends that aren't African American, they look at me as if I'm crazy. Why do you have to tell your kids that? Because it means the difference between life and death for my son. Whereas some folks that don't look like my son and me, yeah, a simple traffic stop may be just that, a simple traffic stop. For folks that don't look like us, that officer giving you the benefit of the doubt as soon as they see your skin color. Whereas it's a whole different heightened awareness for someone who has darker pigmentation. The training, and I remember this coming up in class too, at the target range, the imagery that they shoot at is what color? Black. And so this learning, this educating of things that look black, dark skin is bad, the bad guys to be feared, to be taken out. It shouldn't be that way, but that is the reality that we live in, for me. And so having to tell my son this and hoping that he can remember every single word that I told him as a black parent is something that I hold every time that my son leaves our house. And when he first started driving, I literally would not lay down until my son got back into the house, because I don't know what's gonna happen when he's out there behind the wheel. And my son's a 4.2 GPA student, honors kid, band kid, got accepted into 6 of the 7 colleges that he applied to. He's a really good kid, but in the eyes of law enforcement, he may be perceived as a threat. Because a lot of black and brown children, they're not treated as children, they're treated as adults, even though they're children. And so I just wanted to share that.
So the question is, where does that come from the police officer's perspective? Where does that concept of criminality being black, where does that come from? And we can go all the way back to the slave patrol days. We can do that. But as a police supervisor and manager later on in my career, what is my responsibility to aspiring young police officers in the training that I'm giving them and in our police academies? And so I can remember the first few years of my career, if I had to stop or pull over a black person, a black male, I always prepared myself. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, here we go. He's gonna be defiant, he's gonna yell, he's gonna run his own show, and I'm gonna have to step up my game to make sure to make sure I know he knows I'm in charge still. I'm not gonna let that guy walk all over me. And so for that formula is a deadly formula. Because JC is going to come with his lived experience of being stopped 100 times. And I'm going to come with my lived experience of always having to argue and fight and yell with African American subjects. And then we're going to bring this to the same arena. And who knows what's going to happen? I might feel threatened and I have to pull my gun out and point it at him. It may turn into a wrestling match where I may have to shoot and kill this person, all because we've come from different backgrounds. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if JC and his son, and I use him specifically, but in general, wouldn't it be kind of cool if he understood what a police officer's perspective was and the police officer's desire to do his job and come home at the end of his shift in one piece? Wouldn't it be nice for the police officer to understand why every time you pull over a certain group of people, they are defiant? Wouldn't it be good to know what they have to live through? If I knew what JC and his son, or JC as a young man, had to go through preparing for life in the big world, if I knew his struggles and his obstacles, would that have made me a better police officer? Would that have made me a police officer that, when faced with dissent and consternation from a motorist, wouldn't that be great if I could go, oh, I'm reacting to this, but let me take a deep breath and ask myself, where is this coming from? Exhale, approach the car, and engage in a conversation, just like what happened in the classroom. Wouldn't that be awesome? And that's what I hope we can get to, is that I can learn, or police officers can learn, by walking in the shoes of others. And by the same token, I would hope the public would try to walk in the shoes of a police officer that still has an obligation to uphold the Constitution, put dangerous criminals in jail, but also to go home to his wife and kids, because I got to be home by 6 to take my daughter to soccer practice. If we could all understand each other on a very human, personal level, then maybe those volatile explosions don't happen on those car stops.
It would be nice. It really would. And I think that if police officers lived amongst the communities that they serve, I think that would help close this gap of them and us. Far too frequent, I think, that police officers live outside of the communities that they patrol, and maybe some say, oh, that's for safety reasons. But there's one particular officer in LA that I'm thinking about, that he's a police officer that lives in the community that he serves, and he works down in Skid Row, one of the difficult populations. And those folks that are there love this man. He knows the people that he serves by name, many of them, homeless, drug addicted, mental health issues, that when this officer comes around, he's not perceived as a threat by the community that he actually serves. He actually advocates for the community that he serves. But when it's this, I'm going to work in a neighborhood that isn't the neighborhood that I come from. I'm gonna go do my 8, 10, 12 hours, my double shift, whatever the case may be, but then I'm gonna drive and go into my own bubble or my own community to where it reinforces this us and them. I think there's something about proximity. Brian Stevenson is a really famous attorney. He talks a lot about proximity. Until groups that are diametrically opposed to one another close that gap that lies in between, and we can start putting faces and names to these things that we see that seems like this just a idea that's over here. It's not really personal to me. When we close that and you start to see a different face of the carceral system, those who are in our systems, people start to go, I didn't realize that there were people like JC that are actually confined, that have the potential and capabilities of, after the trauma, getting all the way up to a doctorate, to running a multi-million-dollar program. I got a nice corner office, Darren, to tell you, right? Serving over 150 students, done 2 TED Talks, right? I get paid to travel the country and talk about this very topic, the need for educational programs in correctional facilities. Built out a program that's in 3 of our juvenile facilities here in Orange County right now, where formerly incarcerated men and women have the privilege and access to go in and work with the incarcerated youth with the aims of them never seeing the inside of a county jail or a prison cell. To be able to have the privilege to do that now, if officers, if those who have conservative mindsets could really understand that everyone in prison is not a bad human being. A lot of folks in prison are there because of the social economic statuses of the neighborhoods that they live in. It is a lot of drug addiction that happens in prison, not the criminal rape, murder, robbery that the news like to glamorize, especially in the 80s with cops, because everything then was, if it bleed, it leads. That is what the news used to say, right? We don't hear the successful stories about reentry of those coming out of our criminal justice system. And let me tell y'all, I know hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women across our country that are doing amazing, amazing things today in spite of their criminal past. I am not a unicorn, I'm not an exception to the rule. But we don't see that on the news. No one's talking about those stories, but it's the truth. And so until we start to close that gap and give the communities a different narrative about the type of folks that are coming out of our systems, nothing changes. The fact is this, 92 to 94% of those that are currently incarcerated, they are coming home, y'all. Whether you want them to or not, they are coming to your church, your schools, your movie theaters, your shopping centers, your classrooms. The question that we should be asking is, what type of individuals do we want them to be when they come home to our communities? The one thing that has shown to make an impact is education. The more education that incarcerated individuals have, the less likely they are to recidivate. And for me as a sociologist, my thing studying systems, I say, if we know that this has the power and the potential to curb recidivism, to empower disenfranchised communities, why wouldn't we put more educational programs inside of these spaces? And instead of doing that, we have removed and stripped away many of these educational opportunities that lie inside. The higher education that one has after incarceration, the less likely they are to recidivate. And so it makes me think about, if we know this to be true, in Project Rebound, just let me tell y'all this, it has proven that data to be true. And this is data that's coming from 60, 70 years ago. Our recidivism rate at Project Rebound at our campus, and this is our 10th year in existence, at Fullerton, we have less than a 4% recidivism rate, compared to the national average right now, hovering right around, last time I checked, 47, 48%. Prior to 2 years ago, Project Rebound's recidivism rate was below 1%. Think about that. So much so that the Lieutenant Governor of California came to our campus and met with us and said, what are y'all doing? Because something is happening where all of these formerly incarcerated men and women, they're not getting violated and they're not going back to prison. They're not doing more crimes. They're actually earning degrees and outperforming, get this, our GPA average in our program is outperforming that of the average student at our campus. What does that tell you? Give folks access to quality education and it makes a difference. And the sociologist in me says, if we know that to be true, why are we doing something different? Why are we doing something different, Darren?
You got to ask the doctor over here.
I'm actually noticing the time, and I think this might be a great opportunity to open it up to the floor for questions. But to your point about education, I think another really neat thing that we could do is to expand education before people come back to the community. I went on a tour of the Chino Institute for Men about a week ago, and they helped us tour, they led us through the educational programming there. Beforehand, the correctional officer said, you might want to teach here. We pay $15,000 a month for what we're doing in here with education. And I get into this room, I did not verify that, by the way. I get into this room, and there is one small section of this very old room for folks that are interested in learning at the 1st to 3rd grade level. There is another room where all of those men that are at a 3rd to 6th grade level have the opportunity collectively to learn. And then there is one section that is for transitions, driver's license, and so on, when you are about a year from being released. But I thought, $15,000 to pay one person when you have this many men that are learning at a 1st to 6th grade level, there is something wrong with the math in that case, right? And I've had the fortune of teaching inside the jail, bringing students like yourselves into the jail alongside people that are living in the jail, awaiting their trials. And that helps get at the point where we don't only say to law enforcement, how about you live in the community? But we place upon ourselves an interest and a demand that we have the right to go into carceral settings to participate in education with people who are currently serving time there, and to take back into our communities what we learn from them. And they have the benefit of taking into their communities what they learn from us, right? And when I think about it that way, it's really tangible. It isn't just, oh, I like this idea of proximity. Darren, you know a lot of cops. Could you get them to do some things differently? Oh, let's present the perspective of law enforcement to a population that is over-policed, because I'm not, and neither will my son be, probably living in that kind of community. Yet I believe it is a responsibility that we all share. It is not just for other people. It is incumbent upon us all, if we want to see change in the trends that I talked about and the ones that have been talked about this morning in our society. Right? It cannot just be these are some great ideas for them. It is, these are some great ideas for us, right? But I really appreciate, there were some great takeaways from both of you, and I'm interested in the student questions, and maybe you picked up on some takeaways. One that I think transcends even this context is, JC, you were very confident in the classroom. Not all of my students feel confident, even respectfully so, in speaking so directly about their concerns, maybe about some of the material and so on. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but sometimes I sense there might be some concern, and yet we don't always feel really confident to speak up. And the other thing I noticed is, I don't think as professors or a person who maybe is in a position of authority, if we necessarily feel comfortable pausing to think about a direct challenge and then publicly apologizing, which is such a great thing to do, because it helps the students see, I can be more confident like JC was, because this is a safe space for me to voice those concerns. And the person in charge in this space is willing to think himself or herself and even apologize?
You know, I have to tell you, and I told this to JC, like, where did this come from in me as an instructor? Mental wellness, emotional wellness, and being vulnerable and admitting that, you know what, I'm not perfect. At the time, there's been times in my life, my personal career, professional career, that I struggled with being happy. And so seeing and taking advice from mental health clinicians was very productive. And so fixing myself, if we fix ourselves and we're good and we're grounded, it's a lot easier for us to help others. Okay, so and so that's where that was coming from. Being able to admit that I was wrong came from a place where I had to admit that, you know what, I ain't perfect, and sometimes I need to ask for help. So that translated very easily into the classroom, the emotional wellness component. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I think as teachers, as professors, as instructors, we have a responsibility to create an environment where students are comfortable to express differing opinions. And I say this because from my experience working at a university level, students and the academic and the textbooks tend to lean a certain way on the political spectrum, which kind of is great, but what happens if you're on the right? That tends to alienate you. And so if you're in a learning environment where the instructor is not intentionally allowing students to voice their opinions without expressing bias, then we're really stifling the student growth. I remember one specific instance where I visited a classroom a couple of years ago. I was asked to guest speak, and I asked the students in this classroom, what do you think about this topic? And I could tell a student up at the front of the classroom wanted to say something, but she wasn't saying anything. And the classroom was just dead silent for my 45 minutes up there. I'm like, what is wrong with this classroom? And the instructor said at the time, well, my classroom is just really quiet. I'm like, well, my classroom ain't like this. And so finally, I asked another question, and I went to that student in front, and I go, just say it. I can tell you want to say something. And she says to me, very quietly, I have an opinion, but I'm not comfortable expressing it because it's different than what my professor's opinion is. It's different than what she is teaching me. And I knew then that my role as a college professor is not to force feed police stuff down my students' throat. It's to allow them to absorb all the different evidence and data, and then make the opinions, and then make the changes themselves. Take that data, take those opinions, take the evidence, and then form your own opinions, and then go out and make those changes on your own. But to do that, to force my students to say and think only a certain way is really bad for a college learning environment. And that goes for both sides of this political spectrum.
I want to add something to that really quick. That is so true. There was another experience at Cal State Fullerton with me with another professor that did affect my grade, to whereas Darren received what I said and did what he did, another professor told me, if you understood my pedagogy, your grade would have been different. And I said, what does that have to do with the paper that I wrote that you gave me a B on with no comments? Where did I lose points at? Right? And her response was, you didn't understand my pedagogy. Had you been home a little while longer, maybe she didn't like to be challenged. And I wasn't challenging her whatsoever. Again, we were talking about criminalization in our country. And I had to challenge the grade that I was given, went to the dean, grade got changed. I got the A that I felt that I deserved. But to say that you gave me a B solely because you didn't like the fact that I disagreed with you, I wasn't disrespectful about it, but I have a position and an opinion, and I use the research that you gave us to make the point. There were times in this classroom to where there had 35, 37 of us in there, and me and the professor would be the only two talking, as if no one else even did the reading. And it's a shame that some students sit in these spaces knowing that they have opinions and don't feel safe enough to share it. The one thing that prison has given me in those educational classrooms was the ability to think critically. The way that our current educational system is, and God bless teachers, because it's a hard, hard job, but a lot of it is repeat what I'm telling you. Wash, rinse, repeat. Put it on the quiz, put it on the exam, and you get a passing. I was taught inside of correctional spaces to when they give us these articles and these readings, filter that through your lived experience. Who wrote it? When was it written? The research, if it's a research study, who were they doing the research with? At the time, consider what was going on. Does this apply to women the same that it does for men? All of these different layers of actually thinking critical is what I brought into the classroom space when I came to Cal State Fullerton. On top of, when I came home, I was 37 years old. I'm a non-traditional college-age student with lived experience, and I was older than one of my professors that was trying to tell me about the carceral system that I spent more than half of my life in. Right? And so for my lived experience to not be viewed as an asset in the educational classroom, but something as, oh, are you challenging my pedagogy? We as professors, as educators, I feel that we should be more open to saying, what have students' experience been thus far? Because we all have had them. I'm looking at a lot of women in this space. Your experience as women in the systems that we are in currently, y'all have something to add of value that a lot of men that look like us, that's not our reality. But yet, we don't share that sometime in an educational forum where we can actually learn from one another. That is how we're gonna start changing some of these systems. Yeah, it's tough to find your voice and to go against the grain, but it is so, so needed. Silence, for me, is part of the problem. Until we got some skin vested in the game, nothing changes.
Professor, yes. Professor Camelot, I'm noticing that we are just about out of time. Can we ask a question or two from? All right, so I wore my comfy shoes. I'm ready to take some questions.
Ask some hard questions. Don't ask the easy questions.
Yeah.
You guys get credit for class participation too. Don't be scared.
Yes, we got one. All right, thank you so much.
First off, I just want to say thank you for both speaking. You guys it was just so powerful and inspiring, and like literally I feel motivated even just listening to this. My question would be for Jason. JC, I'm sorry, JC. How did you overcome those labels? I feel like words are really powerful. Even experiences that you go through as a child of like homelessness, those things that can feel so ingrained inside of you. How did you overcome certain labels that have been put on you to, go to further education, go after certain things, a marriage, children, and choose that like lifestyle?
I have this thing about know your why. And in my office, I have right in front of me these huge block letters that say know your why. And around these letters are all pictures of formerly incarcerated men and women that I've come into contact with. There's mentors that have poured into my life that's on this wall. As soon as I knew that I was not made to be inside, I was not made to have people telling me when I can go in and out of a door, when I can eat, when I can shower, when I can use the phone. Everything about prison, I hated. I hated it, the prison politics. And so I knew early on, I need to figure out something else. That something else started with, what is the man or who is the man that I want to become? The more in focus that became, the easier it was that when people tried to label me as something, that don't fit me, man, watch out. So much so that I had wardens inside of the institutions I was at asking, what did you do to get here again? I would invite you over to my house for dinner or to watch my kids. I had wardens telling me that while I was doing my time. Because the hard part when I was incarcerated is once I knew the type of man that I wanted to become, now it's like really the fish swimming upstream, because that environment is not conducive to creating this. And so were there confrontations? Absolutely. Were there challenges and being called out? Absolutely. One came from a correctional officer that could have gotten me killed inside. And at the time, I'll be real quick with it, at the time, I was the chairman of a group that brought at-risk youth inside of the prison. And we did the tour, we talked about our experiences and where we went wrong. One of the correctional staff, as we're going throughout the prison, gets on the microphone. And mind you, this microphone system goes throughout the whole first floor of the prison. And he says, "Hey, JC, you working with the police now?" That would have got me killed. That would have literally. And my first reaction was, I yelled at the top of my voice as loud as I could, "Hell yeah, I'm working with the police if it means one of these youngsters won't be my cellie." And that kept me safe. But it's knowing who I wanted to be made it easier for me to strip those labels off. And to this day, I am still stripping off labels, but I know who I am. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Nina Rose with Student Development. So what made you decide to go out and publicly speak and tell your story about what you went through?
I wanted to change the narrative. I wanted to show people that there is another side to formerly incarcerated men and women that are getting out of our systems that never get talked about, that are doing amazing, amazing work in these communities that they have taken away from and damaged at one point in their life. They are the ones going in, not with fear, but with credibility, to talk to some of these wild and out youngsters and say, "Yo, man, I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Let me give you the real game." Right? I think people need to see the other side, and not everyone that's in our correctional system is evil and bad. So I came home with a mission to change the narrative. Everything that I've done in the last 9 years since I've been home has been to change the narrative of who and what people think and say that we are.
I love it. Thank you.
Hello, this is a question for Darren. Did you ever, after talking with JC and all of your other students, learning from their perspectives about like their experiences with the police and the criminal justice system, did you ever go back to your own colleagues and talk about that stuff and what they thought about those experiences that your students came up with, or even just how they perceived how the public perceived them? Like, were they receptive to those kind of like thoughts about the police system?
This is a really good question. And it's really, really hard to bring these concepts from the academic setting and bring it into the police world. The police officers are an interesting population. They look at the world as an us against them. I mean, yes, there's variants of that, but for the most part, traditionally, it was an us against them. And so for me to walk back to my police department and go, "Hey, we've been doing wrong for all these years. I want you guys not to be racist, and I want you to be unbiased, and then treat everybody with great respect." That doesn't work. And so the art of that is, as a police trainer myself, almost my whole career, is going back into the police world and providing them with direction and context and information without making it seem like I've turned into one of them, okay? Because it's an us against them. A funny side note is, if you want to sell an idea to a bunch of police officers, you paint it black and you call it tactical. and they will like love that stuff. Okay, so I was a state-approved racial profiling instructor. California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training granted me the authority to teach this concept called racial profiling. And we call it cultural diversity now. But I was not able to walk into the classroom or to the police department during our training sessions and say, don't be a racist. It wasn't going to work. So when I can turn it into, here's a way for us to interact with the community, which will reduce our perhaps complaints that people file against us, or it will reduce uses of force because we're able to speak, we are able to de-escalate situations. When I'm able to do that and put it into different terms, officer safety, you're going to do your job better, and you're going to make it home at the end of your shift alive. When I can frame it that way, I get a lot more reception. They're more receptive to the concept of what we were doing in the classroom. So it's just the packaging has to be a little bit different. And I can probably say it's probably the same with the military. If you can package it differently and sell it differently, it's going to be consumed more.
I have a question that is there ongoing training, like cultural competency, like when there's officers that are being brought in out of training, are those conversations being had, and are folks from the community coming in to maybe speak about, you stay in proximity, speaking about the community in which you're going to be served? Because I know you brought, this question kind of came up a while ago, but it's like, okay, what is going to be done? What can be done to just change recidivism rates, the bad guys, the things that just happen within these communities, you know, the community members versus police officers. And I always come back to the design, so built by design, right? Some of these, the power, the privilege, the design of our prison systems. So if we say we're having these conversations and what we can do, I always tend to think, gosh, I think it was said at the front, like, what can we do? Because I feel like it's just always something bad. You know, the data shows this. There's nothing that necessarily could be done in essence, but is there ongoing training, like cultural competency, folks from the community coming in, like meeting with these police officers on a, I don't know, monthly or just at some point during their training?
There is not enough training.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this much. And there's a variety of different reasons, one of which is budgeting and staffing. You still need police officers to operate their police cars and go out and serve the community. Mm-hmm. So when we look at an understaffed police department and budgetary constraints, which is happening all across the country, the ability to train and overtrain is really not there.
Yeah.
And so these conversations have to happen, not in the training room in the classroom. I think where we need to focus these conversations is in the hallways, mm-hmm. and over lunch and over cups of coffee. And so we can start with, who are you electing to your city councils? Mm-hmm. What influences and perspectives do they have? Because those are the people on your city councils. Those are the ones, in addition to the city manager, they're going to select the next police chief. And if you select a police chief, a leader of an organization that has the philosophies and influences and perspectives that are more aligned with the community, then you're more likely to have that trickle-down effect to their deputy chiefs and their captains and their lieutenants and their sergeants, all the way down to the line level officers.
Right.
So we have to start from the top.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this discussion today. It was great. And I think what stood out to me was, like, I always say you can't see what's written across a person's heart, you know, and I guess the conversations that were had and the reflection that you had, I feel, I guess if any, what I'm taking away from this is I need to just do that on a daily basis, check myself, and be reminded that my walk is not your walk, you know, and you don't always see what's written across a person's heart, but the fact that you know, were able to switch it up and do things differently, I think is beautiful.
Thank you. Yes.
This is for both of you, and it kind of goes back to the being part of the community you serve. I've heard ideas before of having a separate group to deal with disputes that are non-violent, but do you think that would create an unnecessary split between the police and the community even more so? And would that even be feasible with the unpredictable nature of calls?
If I understand your comment or question, is it possible to civilianize the traditional law enforcement police department? Because, well, and I think when we look at policing in general, the majority of policing function is order maintenance and service. It's not enforcing the law and arresting people. And so can we kind of do a pivot, a shift in paradigm where we are now recruiting, hiring, retaining individuals that don't necessarily have the traditional law enforcement background? And I think that's a really great way of looking at it, and perhaps we do that. I know in the agency that I used to work before I retired, we started to hire civilian investigators that investigated lower level nonviolent crimes. So they're bringing that perspective in. And then the second thing that we started doing was in the area of mental illness. Okay, we discovered over time that when we look at mental illness calls, most of the time they don't need police. They need subject matter experts, such as a social worker, a drug counselor, or a mental health clinician to come in and to defuse the situation. And so when we started to do that roughly about 5, 6, 7 years ago, what we started to notice is lower incidences of arrest, lower uses of force, and more people getting the help that they need, which is housing and drug and mental health counseling.
Just to add a little bit more, to that, I think that's definitely the right direction. Because I think most, and correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, most law enforcement training, it doesn't include someone that's having a mental health break. I'm trained to go in, assess very, very quickly, right, eliminate or mitigate the threat. But if someone is having an episode that this person is more of a threat to themselves probably than anyone else, especially if you don't physically see a weapon of any sort. But if we don't have training for that, if the only thing I was given was a hammer and to me everything's a nail, I'm going to treat this breakdown as if it's a bank robber. Two different extremes. I also feel that community policing is needed. I think that within certain communities, there are always these, my experience have been, there's always these families that have everyone in the community's respect, that kind of they know about, and it's, if they say, like, hey, we should be doing this, the community can rally behind that. And so it's self-empowerment, it's taking accountability to saying we don't always need an outside officer to come in and tell us how to conduct business when we know right from wrong. We know how people should be treated and want to be treated. We can kind of do that ourselves. I think with the law enforcement, something that I've seen starting to happen too is these social workers now being able to ride along to some of these calls, which I love that idea. And I also think that the educational training of law enforcement and correctional officers especially, having them take a psychology class or social work class would actually benefit them in their work as officers out in the field.
I know there's a question up front, but let me finish this discussion here. In my career, I was also considered what's called a force instructor. I taught officers how to take people into custody when they didn't want to be taken into custody, physically. And so traditionally, we've looked at defiance the same way. If you ask somebody to do something, they don't do it, you raise your voice. They still don't do it, you walk over there and you place your hands upon them and you use force. That was the traditional way of dealing with defiance. But we've started to see some of the very limited research that we have is when we look at uses of force by police officers, a huge majority of the uses of force that were being used were on individuals who were having a mental health crisis or they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So already off of the bat, you're dealing with something that's not going to listen to your rational instructions. So this traditional concept of using force on everybody that was being defiant is just causing people to get hurt or to get killed. And so we started to develop a newer way of looking at defiance from a mental health perspective. And you know what? If it's safe for the officer to do so, and I always use this term, take a breath, try to de-escalate, and try to deal with this individual rationally. Because when we start to get into this fighting brain, this reactive, emotional, I call it an amygdala hijack, when we're starting to fight for survival, then all of the critical thinking goes out the window. And that goes the same for police officers and the individual you're wrestling around with in the gutter. Okay, when we can keep both parties in their thinking brains, then we can solve the problems without pulling a gun out and shooting an assailant. I think there's a question up here in the front.
Yes, thank you to our wonderful audience and speakers for such an inspiring time together. I think the speakers may have a few more minutes up front separately if you have some questions or if you want to continue this conversation. But just a round of applause, please, for taking the time today to focus on these issues.